Emulsified dressings and sauces. These are those rich and creamy providers of flavor that bring deliciousness to any food. They are also a great application area to highlight Citri-Fi's emulsification capabilities. My name is Kurt Villach, and I am the Applications Director at Fiberstar Incorporated. We are the manufacturer of Citri-Fi citrus fiber. Hopefully by now you've been introduced to Citri-Fi in general, so let's jump right into this application area. Think for a minute about all the different sauce types that you've eaten that may contain fat. Here's a partial list. So there are many food-grade emulsifiers out there, but if you're looking for a clean label natural emulsifier, they're few and far between and very difficult to find. Citri-Fi is not only a clean label option, but is also a very powerful emulsifier. As a developer, there are a few technical hurdles that you might be dealing with when it comes to emulsified sauces. The big one obviously is stability. If the emulsion breaks, becomes oily and watery or gummy, that's a problem. And it has to be stable throughout a number of different types of conditions. Other things that Citri-Fi in particular can help with is ease of emulsion formation. Most emulsions that you're familiar with involve shearing up the oil phase into very, very small droplets and then coating them with a surfactant on the outside to stabilize them. What you'll find if you start working with Citri-Fi is that you don't need to have that active energy input, and you can actually form emulsions much more passively without all that expensive equipment if you want. Other things that a formulator might be interested in doing is reducing egg, reducing fat, which seems to be the new normal. And in doing these types of products, you always want to preserve the mouthfeel. And you may be interested in binding free water. For example, if you have a emulsified sauce that's quite thick and it has vegetables in it, those vegetables might be leaking water, or there might be syneresis occurring in your product, and the ability of the Citri-Fi to bind up the free water can help prevent that. And of course, acid stability, as a lot of these condiment type emulsified sauces are acidified with vinegar or lemon juice. All right, let's take a closer look at how Citri-Fi works. If you've ever seen any of our other videos, you know that Citri-Fi, it binds both water and oil. And if you combine those two, well, then you have an emulsion. Here, if you watch the video, you can see how the Citri-Fi is dispersed in oil first. And then when water is added, it only takes some light mixing, and the emulsion will almost pop right into place. So there you have a creamy type sauce, and it didn't require a homogenizer or a colloid mill. So for those who are more interested in the mechanism, there's a couple lines of thinking regarding the science behind the emulsions. Not to get too caught up in the detail, but in many ways pectin can be thought of as a weak emulsifier in itself. And our citrus fiber contains pectin naturally in the citrus fiber. Pectin can be even more efficient as an emulsifier if it teams up with protein, and then it has hydrophobic regions on the protein that like to connect with the oil droplets. But there are also emulsification happening at a different scale. And Citri-Fi citrus fiber contains both soluble fiber, which is the pectin that I mentioned, and insoluble fiber, which is obviously insoluble and it forms a framework. The insoluble fiber has great surface area thanks to its special processing. What we see in this image here is a snapshot in time as that emulsion was being formed in a previous video. And so what we have here is, if you look at the white, that's the insoluble fiber, the cellulose part of the fiber, and those look like little strands of tissue paper, shredded tissue paper, with large surface area. The blue or the purple is actually the pectin that's been released from the citrus fiber, and you can see that the fat is kind of comfortable hanging out with that pectin. But really what happens, and the oil is red, by the way, and the black just represents the water. There's nothing else in there except for Citri-Fi oil and water. But what typically happens in emulsion is you usually see round oil droplets, and they usually get turned into smaller droplets through some sort of energy input, and then the emulsifier coats the outside of that droplet and prevents it from recombining with the oil. But here you can see something else is going on. So now at the kind of the bottom of the picture, you see some round oil droplets, and that's kind of what you normally expect if you were to look at oil under the microscope. But here, as you see, when they start getting up close towards the top of the image, you see the red has lost that perfectly round shape, and it's being assimilated in with the fiber. So there's also that structural aspect of the emulsion. So each one of these fibers is also taking up the oil, and this explains a little bit why you can form emulsions without as much energy input as, say, a traditional mayonnaise or traditional emulsifier stabilized emulsion. So the other thing to keep in mind is that each one of these fibers is not only taking up the oil, but it's also a very strong water binder. So in that sense, it's a very unique emulsion mechanism. And it tells you why it's so easy to form the emulsions. That oil is really quite happy to be associated with a Citri-Fi. Okay, mayonnaise always seems to be like the poster child of emulsified foods. So we're going to use that for a few examples here to show how you might use Citri-Fi. Eggs are a pretty fantastic ingredient when you think about it. And there's no one ingredient that replaces egg completely. However, Citri-Fi is a good option for reducing eggs in a lot of formulations, and that's because it has some overlapping functionality. In this chart, we see that both egg and Citri-Fi, they emulsify. They can bind things in a dough or a batter just cold without any heating. But of course, when you cook an egg, the protein coagulates and thickens. Citri-Fi doesn't change when you heat it. It's actually quite heat stable, which can be an advantage in some applications. In bakery, they'll both add moistness. However, eggs have a particular ability to encourage foaming by stabilizing the air cells. Citri-Fi doesn't do that as much, but what it does do is when there is a foam, it reinforces it and prevents weeping. So it has a property that can be used in tandem with foam formers. And of course, Citri-Fi is vegan, which is a great option for those who are interested in vegan foods. So to benefit with replacing egg in a mayonnaise, why would you want to do this? Well, we just mentioned the vegan aspect. So if you have vegans who can't have any animal products, that is a great option for you. And it can also, make your label more simple. But more commonly, what a lot of people are using as a strategy with eggs is that they're trying to pull them out due to cost because either the egg prices are going up or due to sustainability issues or other clean label issues. They want to switch to eggs that are cage free or free range eggs, and quite simply, they have a greater cost associated with them. So using Citri-Fi in combination can help reduce your egg cost. Here's a couple of different formulas that show you can reduce some egg. In this case, just 25%. To start with, we have the 100M40. That's one of our flagship citrus fibers. It has all the properties of citrus fiber, and the M40 designation means that it's a very fine grade, and that we do that, one, because it's efficient in emulsifying, and two, it keeps the product silky and smooth. We can reduce the egg by 25%. In this case, we also use the 300. 300M40 has some xanthan that's been co-processed into it. So only a little bit is needed here that can replace that structure that you lose when you reduce the egg. So as you can see, the mayonnaise comes out looking very similar, regardless of which strategy you choose here. You notice that when you talk about fibers, especially when you're trying to match the same mass that you take out of a comparison formula, that you use this ratio of fiber to water. So that's 1 part Citri-Fi and 17 parts of water. And you can see that the 100M40 can handle that large amount of water and immobilize that much water to replace that egg. When you use the 300M40, which has the xanthan, it's got a much higher water binding capability because of the extra xanthan, but it also thickens. And sometimes that thickening is really good for stabilizing emulsions, as it keeps the oil, any excess oil, from reassociating with itself. But you can see that one binds a lot more water per unit of citrus fiber. Sensory-wise, these products came out very good versus the control. They did come out a little thicker, even though there was less egg. They came out a little bit more white, but that's something that you can tweak through a variety of different options you may have to get the color that you want. Aftertaste was not necessarily a negative thing, and the most important driver, of course, is preference. So you see that both these options tasted quite good to the panelists. Okay, so if you can do that at 25% reduced egg, we can take that concept even further and take out all the egg. This is obviously an advantage for vegan food formulators, but there's also a growing number of people out there who are just really concerned about the use of raw eggs in foods, just due to microbial or salmonella risk. So you could take out all the egg and still get a nice mayonnaise. You can see in the picture, it comes out quite nice. And yes, there is meat in that picture, so you don't necessarily have to use the concept for vegan foods. It's all up to you. But it has a nice, clean, kind of off-white color, and good texture and great flavor release. The nice thing about making mayonnaise with Citri-Fi is that the emulsion is much more forgiving than if you're just making, let's say, a French white sauce with just egg or mayonnaise or whatever the emulsion may be. The Citri-Fi gives you an added level of insurance that the sauce isn't going to break. You still try to add the oil a little slowly, and you try to use some shear to kind of mix it in right where the oil kind of hits. You want to shear it up so that you don't have big pools of oil in there. But it's much more forgiving. Let's say if that blender stick heats up and there's no Citri-Fi there, that emulsion could break very easily just based on temperature alone. With the Citri-Fi there, it's much more resilient. So you have two options on how you want to add it. Most of the time, we recommend dry blending it with the solids that are going to go into the water phase. So that would be the sugar and the salt and anything else you have, like spices. In this particular case, I took the second option, which is you can put the Citri-Fi right into the oil. And by doing that, it disperses really nice, so you don't have to worry about any lumping, which is what you'd normally have to worry about if you had Citri-Fi directly into water. But also, it kind of delays the thickening, because the 300 M40 is quite thick with the xanthan. So in this sense, you kind of ration out the xanthan so it doesn't thicken up too fast until you have a larger volume. So in summary, yeah, either add it to the dries into the water phase, or you can add it to the oil is the other option. Both methods disperse the Citri-Fi nicely. Okay, this is the last mayonnaise example, I promise. And it seems like we've been trying to reduce fat in food for decades now. What I'm hearing now is that it's not just an initiative that companies take. It's reduced fat is now the new normal. It's expected that all your products will have reduced fat. So Citri-Fi can play a role in that. Of course, why do you want to reduce the fat? Well, it's rich in calories, and so obviously for nutrition reasons, you probably want to reduce oil. You could probably make an argument for cost as well, as you can replace some of that fat with water. But the most important thing, if you're mayonnaise, you have to keep the textural expectations up. It's got to deliver on flavor, and it's got to deliver on texture. So here's an example of a dressing. We took out a large amount of fat, 40%, 50% of the existing fat. We start at 80 and go to 40. We keep the eggs constant in here, but we take out a lot of oil and replace it with Citri-Fi 300 M40 and water. The nice thing about Citri-Fi when it comes to fat reduction is that a lot of, you hear the term fat mimetics, and those are ingredients that are designed to imitate fat, and a lot of them have been kind of water-based or protein-based, and, they try to get that texture kind of rolls around on your tongue. What happens with the citrus fiber, if you remember from that picture, is that it's actually holding on to that oil. It's going right up into the fiber. And so at half of the oil, you're still getting a full fat impact just because of the way that those particles roll across your tongue. And by and large, that's been a positive attribute of Citri-Fi for most applications, is that it has a great mouthfeel. And it's mostly because that insoluble fiber matrix just feels really natural and gives a good body going across your tongue. Okay, hopefully by now you're getting the hang of how Citri-Fi emulsifies in sauces. You may not know it, but Citri-Fi is actually used a lot in meats. And it's kind of interesting why it works so well is because it's good at controlling the juices in the meat. That is the water part of the meat, the juicy water part, but also the fat that's associated with the meat, especially when you're cooking. So I did a study to look at that property in particular to show how Citri-Fi controls fat. You could think of this as, if you really wanted to formulate a sauce with added fat, you could do that, of course. It might be a really great way to introduce some rich flavors. But also for sauces that are going to be used on top of or in association with meats. If you want something that's going to not separate out and look greasy and less homogeneous, you can use Citri-Fi to make it all come together nicely. So we started with a dry gravy mix, It's just your standard starch flour type of base, with some flavor potentiators. And then to all those samples, once they were hydrated, we added a certain amount of beef tallow. We put them in sealed jars and cooked them in a hot water bath to kind of simulate like a retort. We just gave them a couple well-defined shakes in between, and then we once they cooked thoroughly, we set them on the table and we just watched for stability. So after cooking the jars, they were left at room temperature, and you'll see something that came out like this. So you have an emulsified phase, you have like a pure water phase on there. Don't let that separation alarm you. That can be easily fixed with some, added thickeners, or even some more Citri-Fi. But what I feel is really important to look at is the homogeneity of this emulsified phase. So if you look at the Citri-Fi one, it's always very extremely fine-grained and homogeneous in this emulsified phase. Whereas in the control, which doesn't have Citri-Fi, you'll see things settling out more flocculation, and more signs of instability. So this one is 0% added fat. The actual dry mix that we used had a little bit of beef fat added, probably 1% or less, in the actual powder mix that we used. We had 1% beef tallow on top, and the Citri-Fi really kind of thrives in that fatty situation. It likes both the fat and the water. So you got a very clean, homogeneous gravy there, whereas you can see in the control, you're getting settling and signs of instability. As you go to relatively high levels of fat, you can see the Citri-Fi is still handling it much, much better, even at 15%, which I expected everything to fall apart at that high level. You have the whole phase there, but with the control, you can really see the flocculation. Those are signs of instability. So whether you would like to formulate fat into a sauce, or you want a sauce that emulsifies upon hydration, or you can even have a sauce that's just associated with a meat in terms of how you cook it, maybe a frozen meal or something like that. Citri-Fi can help keep it all together and keep it much more appetizing visually as well. Okay, so here's another rich sauce. As you know, if you try to melt real cheese, it melts into an oily, sticky mess with a pool of oil and just some gummy protein residue. That is, unless you have an emulsifier present. So we did this recipe based on a recipe for queso fundido, excuse me. And if you wanted to spice this up, you could add some diced jalapenos and some spices. But just to look at the base stability, you see that the emulsion forming and the water binding of the system give it a thick, velvety structure, and holds nicely together for stability. So while we can't really cover every application, hopefully you as a formulator got enough information out of this to realize how it might work in a fat-based system that you're working on. The amount of Citri-Fi to use in emulsified sauce should really parallel the amount of fat that you're trying to correlate, or that you're trying to emulsify, excuse me. And remember that you can also help with emulsion stability if you have some extra thickeners, which is why we offer the Citri-Fi 300, especially when you're dealing with large amounts of fat. Okay, so if you have any questions about Citri-Fi or have a specific application that you'd like to discuss in more detail, please reach out to one of our knowledgeable staff here. We'd be happy to talk through the details with you. Other than that, I'd just like to sign off now and wish you the best of luck in your your formulating endeavors.